it's at a point now where for Boston, they are, on the clock to get it right before big changes need to be made. For those two guys, Tatum and Brown, it's to the point now where you're getting paid max money. It is time to take on some of that leadership responsibility that you're talking about, Chris. This Celtics team here, Chris. You asked me last week, a series of questions about how real their struggles are. After the game last night, Marcus Smart basically just publicly bashed Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. He said, these guys are young and they're getting better. They need to be better passers. They want to score, and every defense knows that's all they want to do is score.
Here, I've got the exact quote right here. Every team knows we're trying to go to Jayson and Jaylen. I think everybody's scouting report is to make those guys try to pass the ball. They don't want to pass the ball, and that's something they're going to learn. Wow.
He's not wrong, but that's something that you don't tell the media. That's something you don't tell the media.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, there's something fundamentally wrong with the Celtics roster. They don't, and I'll say this, with Marcus Smart, I'm a personal fan of Marcus Smart, and one of the reasons why I've always been a fan of him, Chris, is because Marcus Smart has always been a guy that just drives energy. He's been the heartbeat of the Celtics when he's on the floor and he's diving for loose balls and taking charges and doing crazy stuff. Marcus Smart would drive energy for the Celtics. That doesn't happen anymore. People say a coach lost their voice in the locker room. I feel like Marcus Smart kind of lost his voice in the locker room with the Celtics. He doesn't drive energy in the same way he did before. And from everything that's, reported, floating out there, it seems like chemistry with him and some of his teammates isn't quite the same as it was before either. So with Marcus Smart, man, the value, what he brings to that team is diminished when the heartbeat of that he used to bring is no longer there. I'm not sure if this is about him or if it's about Tatum and Brown or just the overall mix.
I think
there's something wrong with this team, man. The personality's not there.
Well, look, it's because he is attempting, and we talked about this in the playoffs 2 years ago. Remember when he went in there and he chucked the chair everywhere and he was furious, and because he feels like and right or wrong, I think Marcus Smart's heart is always in the right place. I think he cares about winning the most. That's what I believe, okay? I also think when Marcus Smart is then forced to be your team leader, now that to me highlights the fact that it's not Tatum's team. It's not Jaylen's team. You know what I'm saying? And you can say, well, it's both their teams. And I'll just say this. I was ready to come in here and say, look, that's a disgusting turn of events last night that they lost that game. But they've lost a couple games this season, overtime, double overtimes, in fact. I think they've lost 2 double overtime games already this year, right? And, those overtime games, and of course you wish you'd got buckets at the end of those games that you came up short, but 2-5, and those could have flipped easy. And if they had, the sky's not falling. You're 2-5 right now. And it's not like you've been, the only game that they were non-competitive in was the second game of the season where they got waxed by Toronto in that strange 115-83 game. The other games, they've all been competitive basketball games that they have played in until they got run out completely in a quarter last night. So I was ready to say, hey, give it time. They got a new coach. They got some new players. This is going to take a minute, and they've played mostly competitive games until that quote came out, and I read that. That, to me, is infinitely more concerning than the result of last night's game or their 2-5 record thus far. Honestly.
Why? Why is it more concerning?
Because he was willing to say that on a microphone. That's not
2 weeks in. That's a 3 months in quote.
It's not in-house.
2 weeks in quote.
It's not in-house. And I don't think that I think that something like that, and again, I don't know the insides of that locker room or how those guys will respond, but, if you're those guys, do you look at it and you say, you know what? He's right. I do need to pass. Or do you say, man, screw that guy. Like, shut up, Marcus.
Yeah.
How about you do this? How about you do that? I passed to you at the end of the whatever game that was, Washington or Charlotte, and you friggin' bricked a 3. Like, what do you want me to do? Right? Like, you want us to pass to you with the game on the line? You know what I'm saying? I'm saying they can go it can go one of two ways, and I don't know, like you say, if Smart has the gravitas. This isn't LeBron saying this. And again, it's not the message, it's the messenger.
Yeah.
And not knowing how they will respond to Marcus saying that, it's almost like, look, we all love Patrick Beverley, but Patrick Beverley saying Paul George and Kawhi Leonard don't pass the ball, everybody's like, shut the hell up, Pat Bev. Like, that's not, like, I guess it highlights the fact that Kawhi Leonard and Paul George aren't the voices for that team. But on the other hand, most people take a step back and they go, hold on, this should not be your role as team spokesman to call out who the 6th and 7th leading scorer in the NBA, what they're doing.
I mean, I think we're reaching the point here. I mean, Tatum is 23, Brown is 25. Like, these guys are still young. I mean, like, the optimist in me says, listen, like, these guys are young. You can't panic. You get to build around them. But the realist in me, which is, the majority of me, is that, like, these guys, are under contract here. And there's, 3 years left on Jaylen's deal. There's 4 years left on Jayson Tatum's deal. For these guys, it's at a point now where for Boston, they are, on the clock to get it right before big changes need to be made. For those two guys, Tatum and Brown, it's to the point now where you're getting paid max money. It is time to take on some of that leadership responsibility that you're talking about, Chris. You hit this all the time on the pod, that if leadership isn't coming from your best players, that can be detrimental to your team.
Yes.
And for Tatum and Brown here, I think I want to juxtapose this against the other team Chicago beat, the Utah Jazz. Donovan Mitchell has already grown into a vocal leader.
Absolutely.
For the Utah Jazz. Rudy Gobert is a leader by example, with the effort and the intensity and the communication on the court. Different types of leaders for that team who were young with the organization and grew into those roles. That's the next step for Tatum and Brown, is not only continuing to get better on the court, Tatum getting better as a passer. Brown has gotten so much better as a scorer. It's crazy what some of the games he's had, but also getting better as a leader, steering the ship when you're going through an adverse time, being the guy who is the number one voice on the team. I don't think you can say that about either of them right now. And that's something that will have to change for Boston to really go from like this good on paper, great on paper team to actually meeting expectations that you would expect to have for them with those top 7 scorers you're talking about with Tatum and Brown.
You need it to be Jayson Tatum's team. End of story.
Or Jaylen Brown's team. Jaylen Brown is having nights where it looks like his team, because you could argue in that fourth quarter it was too much Tatum and not enough Brown.
Right. And that happens often, actually. But fine. I'm just saying there needs to be the guy, and it is Tatum, and the absence of him being a vocal leader, right, or somebody that everybody rallies behind can be a detriment. And that's why when I mentioned like Pat Bev or whoever it may be, that was one of the things a couple of years ago when there was that huge collapse. The Clippers had one of the worst collapses in the history of the NBA. And I remember I came to you and I said, who's in the huddle saying this shit ain't happening tonight? Who's in the locker room saying this ain't happening? You get this image of, Kawhi Leonard and Paul George going back, not talking to anybody in the locker room, throwing their hoodies up and walking out of the gym. And we'll be back tomorrow. And it's like, and then you're gonna go to the guy that's talking. And it's like, who is the guy that when you get into that huddle, you need that to be either Tatum or Brown. Marcus Smart, whatever you want to say about him, he's just filling a void. Yeah. There's got to be somebody.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
That's a good way to put it. He's filling the void there.
Yes. And
he's filling the void in like a way that don't necessarily want him to fill that void. You want Marcus Smart to be that leader by example on the court, occasionally the fiery guy in the locker room who lights a spark. You don't want him getting fiery with a microphone in front of his face, because that's when he tells everybody. It makes people like us talk about the fact that there's clearly like some disagreement within this locker room. If he's calling out players publicly, the two best players publicly, that's crazy.
It's tough.
Like 5, 6, 7 games in right now.
Right. Because they're, as I said, the 6th and 7th leading scorer in the game. And I think there is that juxtaposition of those two teams. And some of this comes with, as you mentioned, their ages. Kev, DeRozan and Levine are also both simultaneously playing great, but they are also enhancing their teammates. You know what I mean? That's both the difference.
Levine's passing improvement over the years is dramatic.
Right.
Like it's so admirable what he's done to his game. So admirable.
And Tatum and Brown, as I mentioned, are both in the top 10 scorers in the NBA. But who else on that Celtics team is benefiting from their incredible success?
Not Josh Richardson.
Well, it hasn't made it, you know what I mean? You would think that, especially when they're simultaneously averaging over 25 points a game, that it's easy pickings for the rest of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's not.
I think, it just hasn't been with those guys. And I think with this team, like, yeah, sure, you can say Tatum and Brown need to be better in certain ways. But, like, Celtics fans, understandably so, are kind of annoyed with Udoka so far. Some of the rotations, the lineup decisions, over switching on defense at times, lack of movement and cutting on offense as they were accustomed to seeing more often under Stevens, in recent years with different iterations of the roster. And just the fact that some of the guys that Brad Stevens has acquired just aren't working out. Josh Richardson is not the same guy that he was in Miami his last year there when he got his first year of his new contract. He still isn't good, just like he wasn't in Philadelphia. He doesn't appear to be at all the same guy. He's not good, just like he wasn't good in Dallas, just like he wasn't good in Philly. This is unlike Al Horford, who has come back after his time in Philly and OKC and looks better than he did.
I know.
really like in the early days in Boston, but like you've had so far a win with Al Horford, but some of the other guys that you've acquired are looking like losses so far. And so at what point do you bench, a Richardson or diminish his minutes and give a Nesmith more time to get more shooting on the floor?
Because they do, because if you're closing with Smart and Horford, Time Lord, whoever you want to put in, Time Lord, obviously starts games. Neither of those two guys are shooting.
Yeah,
like, who are you expecting to shoot? Like, you've got these two guys. Like, all right, fine, they'll pass it to you. Like, there's not a Celtics fan in the world that wants you shooting that thing, even if you're wide open.
I think what this Boston team really misses is a point guard like the Chicago Bulls acquired in Lonzo Ball, like just a guy who just can facilitate and keeps it moving, just constantly adds flow on the court. Marcus Smart and Dennis Schroeder aren't facilitators like that. Marcus Smart said during the extended quote last night, "I can pass. I can be the guy who's a playmaker." That is true. Marcus Smart can pass, but he's not the type of flow playmaker like Lonzo Ball. And I think finding a guy like that for Boston would really add a lot to what the Tatum Brown core could be together.
This is something that I've not thought about all that much, but now that you said that, I just went back in time and thought, and you think about everyone that they've paired them with. Kyrie Irving, not a facilitator, and then he was replaced by Terry Rozier, not known as a facilitator.
He's a bucket.
Kemba Walker, not known as a facilitator. No. They have the opportunity all season. They go get Dennis Schroeder, not a facilitator. They always go and get. It's interesting you say that. Just a set the offense, set the team up, keep the ball moving guy. They've never, and even like, if you want to say Peyton Pritchard's a backup, he's not a, pass first, keep the ball moving guy. Like, they've never really had one. Now that you think about it,
Yeah, they got to find one.
they always have a scoring.
I really think that's what this roster's missing is a point guard like that, because on paper, their closing lineup can be great. I mean, I like their closing lineup on paper. I do. I really think this team has the pieces. It's just there's some missing things. There's, some weak links. There's the deficiencies of Tatum and Brown that still need to be improved on. And there's something with the character of the team. Like I said at the beginning, with Marcus Smart, I don't think Marcus Smart affects the energy in the court in the way that he did with past rosters. And whether that's due to him or the guys around him, it doesn't matter. The results aren't the same. And I think Brad Stevens, this isn't a championship team. It's not a championship contender. It's not even a team that's going to dream about it this season. But Brad Stevens needs to take this year and set them up for next year and the year after that, because that's when pressure's really going to be up. We talk all the time, like, who's the next star? Who's the next star that's going to be available? We don't know who it's going to be. I mean, what is it, Tatum or Brown? Unless Brad Stevens can get it right this year. It's on Stevens in that front office to get it right. And ultimately, if he doesn't, we will be talking about these guys in another year or two.